Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for coming here, joining us in this online event. And today's topic is about post-growth era, shrinking cities, and regeneration. I personally think this is a very important issue faced by many places in the world, but not quite fully discussed. So that's why I believe it could be very inspiring for many, including myself. And this symposium is co-hosted by the School of Architecture and Planning of Hunan University, China, and the Post-Growth Innovation Lab of University of Wigo, Spain, and the Faculty of Human Geography and Planning, Adam Mickiewicz University, Poland. Meanwhile, we also have many scholars from other universities to join us, sharing their research. I will introduce them later. We will totally have 7 presentations divided into 2 sessions. At the end of each session, we will have some time for questions and discussion. Since this is an online event, so during the presentation, we welcome you to send your comments or questions through the chat box. We will pick up it later. And may I ask all the speakers to keep their talks within the 20 minutes limits. Otherwise, we will be very late for dinner or lunch. So first, I would like to invite the Vice Dean Adam Randzinski of Faculty of Human Geographies and Planning, and Adam Mickiewicz University, to say a few words to kick off this meeting. Please, Professor Adam Randzinski.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhou. It is a great pleasure to me to welcome all the participants on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Human Geography and Planning, Adam Mickiewicz University. The Dean of our faculty is Professor Paweł Hurski, who unfortunately was unable to attend today due to other obligations. We are very pleased that Adam Mickiewicz University participates in this symposium. We've heard that at least some of the participants in the symposium have already collaborated previously, including a book on shrinking cities published recently by Routledge. I've also heard that there are plans to continue this collaboration, and possibly this is a first seminar in a series of meetings. We are looking very much to that, and we also hope that this international collaborations brings results in terms of joint projects or publications. So without consuming too much of precious time, we are looking forward to interesting presentations on shrinking cities, the post-growth era, and regeneration. And I wish you all very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It's very appreciated. So let's get into our presentation. Let's welcome our first speakers, Mario Pensera from University of Vigo. He's the distinguished researcher, ERC grantees, and head of the Post-Growth Innovation Lab there. His talk today will, I believe, will explain the keyword, the post-growth for us. So over to you, Mario.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me upload a presentation, some housekeeping information. I don't know if you're familiar with Teams, but if you have a PowerPoint presentation or any file that you want to share, next to the big red leave button, there is a short a smaller button named share with an arrow. So just click there and then you can upload the presentation. Okay, so give me a second. I will upload mine. Here we are. So the best way to do it is to, instead of sharing your screen, is to upload the file on Teams. So you should click on browse my computer. Okay, this is the best way. Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Mario Pansera. I'm from Italy. I'm based in Spain, and I'm the director of a new, quite recent research group of the University of Vigo called the Post-Growth Innovation Lab. This is a group that was mainly founded in 2021 by the European Research Council with the starting grants. This is our website, so I invite everybody to have a look at the work that we do. we have mainly 4 lines of research. The first one is politics of innovation. So we try to answer questions like, who is innovation for? Who is technology for? What is innovation for? And the politics means who wins and who loses when we implement new technology, no? So it's really like we are trying to look at a different way of understanding and framing science, technology, and innovation. The second line is what is called responsible innovation, that is directly linked to the first one, or that's in which we try to understand how it's possible to govern technology and innovation possibly in a democratic way. No? And this is also connected to the third line, which is grassroots movement. So the idea that knowledge is not only produced in big labs of state lab or big national, multinational corporation, but it's something that's occurring in society. So a lot of innovation, a lot of knowledge production occurs from the bottom up. And we are really interested in this way of doing like co-creation with society, between scientists, experts, and society. And then the fourth line of research is probably the topic of today. So how is possible to create a society that is not obsessed with this imperative? I call it the religion of economic growth. So the idea that society can only progress if we accumulate more money and we create more wealth. Right? Yeah, so I will start this 20 minutes with this basic question that is at the very core of all the work that we do here in the lab. Do we need growth? And what is economic growth? And why we need growth? Why we are so obsessed with this crazy indicator and very narrow indicator that is the GDP? But it's not only the GDP. Everything. No, we are used to say to read in the newspaper the economy has been slowing down in this semester, and this is like basically by default bad, right? Why like that? So let's me introduce the concept of the great acceleration. That's maybe can clarify a little bit why we are so obsessed with economic growth. In this graph, these are from one of the IPCC documents. On the left, you see that during the last probably century, I will say, or maybe a century and a half to 2 centuries, in combination with the Industrial Revolution, we see a great acceleration in many indicators that we consider to be good, right? Population, the GDP, urban population, energy use, consumption, water use, paper production, and many other, transportation, telecommunication. And this is not just a simple increase. Sorry, somebody is messing up with my slide. Don't touch it. We are always like considering this increase as something good, right? Because in many cases these indicators are really associated with the real increase of welfare and well-being. No, things of water use or electricity or telecommunication or transportation. We really were able to bring a lot of people, millions of people out of poverty, right? But the really surprising fact here is that this increase was not slow or steady. This was exponential, right? That's why the great acceleration. You can see here from the 60s, 70s, especially in the global north, the Europe, US, and probably Japan, we have an exponential curve here, right? And then, of course, in the last 30 years, I would say that this trend has been also contributed by China. No, China was probably a unique case in which in only 20 years they were able to bring millions of people out of poverty, something that we in the West were not able. We need like at least 1 century to do the same performance. But the problem, what is the problem? That this scenario has a dark face as well, a dark side. And the dark side is on your right. All the good indicators, all the things that we
Mario,
think that...
Mario, sorry to interrupt. I think the slides keep going very quickly, so I don't think they are following your
sorry,
talk.
I think there is...
They keep moving.
So there is a problem with the... Don't know why, but they're moving. It's like they're automatic. Let me see if I can do something here.
Can you go backwards or something?
No, there is like a sync presenter slide. So I don't know what's going on here.
Actually, I can control it for some reason.
You can control it.
Yes.
Okay, now you see the fifth slide, right? The great
Fifth slide.
acceleration slide.
So this is the fifth slide. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So you can see on the right, we have an increase also of very bad indicators like carbon dioxide emission, methane emission, ocean acidification. So the point here is that if on one hand we had, sorry, this is like, okay, sorry. I will stop this and I will share it in a normal way. This is the first time it happened to me actually. Don't know why. They are keep changing the setting in Teams. So this is very annoying. So let me share my screen, okay? Okay, I think that now you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I think you need to click the use slideshow so we can see the whole image.
Yeah. Did you see now? Do you see it now?
Yes, a very small portion.
Yeah.
Now it's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay. Wow. Technical problems.
Mhm.
Okay, so as you can see, we had growth, we had economic growth. That means all the increase of all these indicators, but at the same time, we also had like destruction. Okay, so the other side of economic growth comes with the costs. Economic growth comes with the cost, and the cost is environmental degradation, ecosystem disruption, emission, climate change, and so on and so forth. Right, and this is very clear. If we want only to focus, for example, on one variable, CO2 emission, that is now is very popular for climate change and everything, all the environmental policy in the global north and the global south are trying to align with the CO2 reduction, right? If we look at the numbers, we can see very clearly that there is a strong correlation between the GDP evolution trends and CO2 emission. And this graph is quite old, but if you look at the numbers during the pandemics, it was very clear. The pandemic was a moment in which the GDP shrunk and also the CO2 emission, and they are very similar pattern. So in very similar ways, and then they rebounded. Okay, so the GDP started growing again, and so the CO2 emission. But at the same time, if on one hand we have a disruption of an environmental disruption, so in order to fuel this growth, we need to extract more material, we need to cut and log more forest. At the same time, we are using the idea of economic growth. We are justifying, legitimizing the idea of economic growth by saying, okay, there is a small or relatively small cost to pay, but in exchange, we are living better, we are living longer, and our quality of life is increasing, right? Well, I would say that this was true at least until the 70s in the North, in Europe and the US, probably for some country in Europe until the 80s. But after a certain point, as the philosopher Ivan Illich used to say, growth become anti-economic. It means that the benefit that it delivers are less and less the damages that it creates. And this is a graph that show in a very simple way, I would say simplistic way, how the real GDP per capita is not linearly correlated with life satisfaction, right? So after a certain point, an increase of wealth, of personal wealth, makes you happy. But then once your material or basic needs are fulfilled, there is no strict correlation between more money and happiness, right? And of course, so on. My point is that apart from being environmental destructive, economic growth also have some social limits, right? It means that if we organize our society around the notion of endless economic growth, so around the idea of individualism and consumerism, the result can be that affluent society becomes frustrated society, because we always need more and more and more. I need a better car than my neighbor, and then my neighbor will get another car, or maybe we will get a private jet, and then I will decide something more, and there is no end to this system, right? To this process. And there is also another important point that I want to raise here, because I think that it's important for our discussion today, is the fact that despite we have been selling this idea of economic growth in the global north, but also in the global south, because I would like to remember you that most of the development policy that has been implemented from the 50s in the so-called global south, so developing country, the so-called developing country, their aim was to increase economic growth, right? So the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Western governments have been investing a lot of money to make or to selling the idea that the global south, the developing country, are underdeveloped, so they have to develop. And how to do that? Through economic growth, right? But there is a very inconvenient truth, which is that not everybody benefits from economic growth. And this is a study from 2017 that show how only the top 1% capture 27 of total growth from 1980 to 2016. It means that you can see here, that's on your left, that's the 1% or less of 1% of population benefit more than almost around 1/3 of the total wealth produced on the global scale, right? So, and you see that the bottom 50%, so half of humanity, only benefit from 12% of the total growth. What it means? It means that growth is not only causing environmental disruption that also has social limits, but it's also unequally distributed, right? So the equation more growth means more well-being for everybody is not true if you look at the data. And I would say that 20 years ago, talking about the fact that the global north has an obsession with economic growth and questioning the fact that we need to pursue endless economic growth in our economies was very controversial. It's true. Well, we don't have time to discuss about the long story of how this idea of were constructed and emerged from the 70s, from the famous Limits to Grow report. But it's sufficient to say that in the 90s, some people, especially in ecological economics and political ecology discipline, start talking about or start claiming that at least we in the affluent North country, we need a certain level of degrowth. So descaling economy. Start thinking, reflecting about what to produce instead of pursuing infinite growth. In some sector, we should even degrowth, right? 20 years ago, these ideas were totally crazy. Today, I would say that there is an increasing number of people in many other disciplines that are enjoying this critique. And this is a recent paper published, a recent comment published by Nature last December that praises degrowth as a political option. And it outlines the scientific reason to advocate for a degrowth, at least in the global north, and also propose some policy. So what has this to do with cities, right? Which is the topic of our seminar today. Yeah. So maybe a few words about why we are here. I was contacted by Kai because he's interested in the phenomenon of shrinking city, and he came across our group. And I think we have a lot in common, because probably one of the biggest point that is totally misunderstood by people who criticize this idea that we need to stop growing is the fact that most of the criticisms come from this idea that the shrinking is always bad. No, shrinking means going back to. I receive comments to my work that say, okay, but what do you want? Do you want to come back to the caves, right? Do you want to come back to prehistory? Progress is linear. There is no. We can stop the progress. We'll have to look ahead, right? So there is this idea that degrowth, or talking about degrowth or post-growth, is talking about coming back to a past, which is some people say that was an ideal past, so a romantic view of idealistic past. Some people say that it's going to be a dystopic situation, in which we basically come back to a situation which we cannot afford to have to go to the hospital or to use internet and so on. Well, we don't think so. We think that actually degrowth can be a very empowering moment in which we really realign our society to goals that are societal goals, right? So why it's important to talk about city? This is an article that was published a few years ago by The Guardian, pointing at the fact that there will be the 21st century will be a century of the 100 million city, right? And it's possibly this going really out of control. Why? Because in my opinion, cities are really the engine of economic growth, at least in the last 50 years. This is a very illustrative graph of Spain. So this is a graph that shows you how where energy is produced and when energy is consumed. So you can see that the most of the producers of the, so you can see that the maximum here, the red is the territory, so are the area in which energy is produced, and the blue here is where those regions that don't produce any energy. See, so you can see that the biggest producer of energy are northwest here, our region, Galicia, part of this region, León, Extremadura, and part of Aragon here. I see that the biggest consumer of energy here are Madrid, which is the capital, and Barcelona, which is the second city, right? So you can see here how the city, like the urban space, the big urban space. So we are talking about here megalopolis. No, Madrid urban area is around 6 million. Maybe this is a small, medium city in China, but in Europe it's a big city. How there is an attraction here, so how they are really like are sucking all the energy, and this is similar graph can be found in other sector like agriculture, like mining, for example. So thinking about what is the right side of the city is super important for the future, because as ecological economists proved, economy is not just about flows of money, it's about flows of energy and materials, right? And ecosystem function through metabolizing energy and material. And cities are places that are absorbing material and energy from the surrounding areas or from the global supply chains, right? So after a certain point, as Ivan Illich was saying, the city can be anti-economic. So it means that the benefit of living in the urban space can be diminishing. And that's why I think that we now are at the crossroads. No, I think that if we keep growing, or at least if we relying everything, our future on unchecked economic growth, a reflexive economic growth, we are probably going towards a chaotic collapse. if we don't govern this process, we will definitely have we will encounter some limits, right? On the other hand, we have the possibility of a planned democratic degrowth, what we call the planned democratic degrowth. That is not like coming back to a past, where the ideal past that never exists, but it's just coming together and think about how we can create different forms of living together. In our case, for the topic of this workshop, thinking a different way of organizing the urban space that is compatible both with the environment and with people, right? So I invite everybody to have a look at our work, but there are a number of political proposals from the degrowth and post-growth community. Here there are 3 very accessible books that talk about what is degrowth, what is this imaginary of degrowth, and what kind of political action can we pursue in order to make or at least to start the conversation about a potential different future. Okay, so I finish here.
Okay, thank you, Marviro, for setting up the discussion, the stage for discussion today perfectly well. And let's move on to our second speaker. And our second speaker is Professor Tadeusz. And Tadeusz is from the Adam Mickiewicz University of Poznan. Over to you, Tadeusz. Hello, I can't hear you. Hello, Professor Tadeusz, I can hear you. You are still muted. Yes. Can we help him to unmute?
I think he's unmuted now.
No, we cannot hear them. Tadeusz. Oh?
I think
yes.
There is a problem with this mic.
Yes. There's always technical problem. Oh, Tadeusz, we cannot hear you. Hello?
Maybe switch off the mic, the headphones, and use the PC.
Yeah,
PC microphone.
It is muted, but the button is.
Yeah. And do you hear us?
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
That's great.
Okay.
Over to you, Tadeusz.
So we have some problems with my computer. You know, the equipment is so outdated that I have really technical problems. But I'm happy that we can meet. So nice to see my old and new colleagues. The title of my paper, as you can see, is Drivers, Specificities and Geographies of Urban Shrinkage in Poland. Let me start from the cover of our book on post-socialist shrinking cities, mentioned by our dean. This was a beginning, I think, of a very good idea of comparing many international research experiences in the field of shrinking cities. So I am particularly happy to see also our Spanish colleagues. The outline of my presentation looks as follows. First, I would like to discuss shortly some turning points in the process of urban shrinkage in the so-called post-socialist cities. Of course, especially in relation to European cities and to Poland. Then, shortly, to present the issue of drivers of shrinkage. The next issue is the scale of and special differences in urban shrinkage in Poland. And finally, a short discussion about our case studies in the context of the proposed Chinese-Polish research project. So as far as the first question is concerned, I can say that the process of urban shrinkage differs in time and space. In the post-socialist countries of East Central Europe, including Poland, it started from 1990, and it has been strongly influenced not only by such general trends as deindustrialization or demographic decline, but also by great institutional changes such as systemic change, that is a transition from a command to a market-oriented democratic system, and accession to the European Union. Of course, both these changes had great consequences for the process of shrinkage. Here you can see some of these consequences are listed. So in general, we can say that some specificities of the process of change, of transformation in post-socialist countries of East Central Europe, some specificities are related to the moment of systemic change, the first turning point, then the EU enlargement, and a very recent event, Russian military attack or invasion on Ukraine. Of course, we have also some global issues like financial crisis or COVID-19 pandemic, and both these processes are overlapping. Let me discuss especially some recent events and drivers or main determinants of shrinkage. So very often we say that the demographic processes, suburbanization, deindustrialization, or international migrations are the most important determinants of shrinkage. However, as you can see, demographic processes, suburbanization are still important in Poland. But as far as deindustrialization is concerned, we can say that the role of this process, of this factor, is diminishing. Now we can speak about reindustrialization policy in our country. It is also connected with growing armament industry, energy sector transformation. So the role of this factor is diminishing. Of course, also another factor, maybe not of course, but also another factor, international migrations. So here, as far as Poland is concerned, outflow of Poles is compensated by inflow of Ukrainian refugees. I only would like to show you some recent graphs showing how many Ukrainian refugees came to Poland within a very short period of time. So sometimes you can see here more than 100,000 refugees entered Poland almost within one day. And here is a spatial distribution of Ukrainian refugees. So it is not so much connected with shrinking areas, with shrinking cities. For instance, in the regions bordering Ukraine or Belarus, the migrants from Ukraine, they don't want to live simply in these areas. Maybe they are afraid. So if I can sum up the impact of the Ukrainian war on the process of urban shrinkage in Poland, we can say that in many shrinking cities, an inflow of Ukrainian refugees compensated for an outflow of Polish people from city cores to their suburbs. So this means that suburbanization has become a less important driver of shrinkage. The second conclusion is that the cores of some of the largest Polish metropolises recorded 5 to 4% population growth over the period of 2 months. So very short period, relatively high growth. And final remark, that a relatively large proportion of Ukrainian migrants prefers Western locations, as you can see here on this map. Yeah? So close to Polish-German border, which perhaps they would like to go further to, let's say, other Western European countries. So the next issue is the scale and spatial differences in urban shrinkage in Poland. Here first, a European background. So as you can see, Poland is in the middle in this process. Yeah, the process of shrinkage in Europe affects especially the Baltic states, also bordering Russia, like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, or Balkan states like Bosnia or Herzegovina. Poland is in the middle. And here you can see the spatial distribution of shrinkage, of population change in our country. So as you can see, there are some large areas of shrinkage, especially in eastern Poland. But the next map shows geography of shrinking cities in Poland. We have made a long-term analysis, 1990-2020, and a map of shrinking cities is not changing. As you can see, the largest areas of shrinking cities are located in southwestern Poland, that is in old industrial districts of Upper Silesia and Lower Silesia. In general, we have more than 300 shrinking cities in Poland, and the number, as you can see here, of shrinking cities is growing. I think that a very important question is defining in urban shrinkage in Poland by city size. So here you can see that medium-sized cities are most affected by the process of shrinkage. So, of course, in the Polish condition, medium-sized cities are between 50 and 500,000 inhabitants. So I think that maybe our Chinese colleagues are laughing here because I expect in China this population means larger villages rather than cities. And at the end of my short presentation, because we have not so much time, I would like to move to our proposed Chinese-Polish research project. Its title is Managing Urban Shrinkage in Different Governance Systems. And especially we would like to deal with institutional dynamics and regeneration strategies in both countries, in China and in Poland. Here you can see some keywords. Apart from urban shrinkage, urban governance, we would like to focus on regeneration strategies, institutional dynamics, planning cultures, and the object of our research are third-tier cities, the so-called third-tier cities. And here you can see the location of case studies. It is very interesting because first we have chosen different Polish cities located in different regions. In central Poland, in Konin, Wałbrzych is located in southwestern Poland, and Przemyśl is located close to the Polish-Ukrainian border. And here is a general characteristics of these cities. Konin and Wałbrzych are mining cities, and also connected. Konin is connected with power generation. Wałbrzych has, let's say, the longest in Poland tradition of shrinkage. Yeah, so the process started already at the end of 1980s. Konin is a city. We can say that is still waiting for great transformation. And Przemyśl, we can observe, especially now, very, very quick changes in this city. Apart from these general characteristics, I would like to add some very recent news which may have impact on managing urban shrinkage. So in my opinion, that they also should be considered in our analysis, in our studies. So for instance, the Wałbrzych is the most indebted city in Poland. Another very interesting story is connected with this city, a legend of a golden train. The legendary Nazi train was buried in an underground tunnel in Lower Silesia in January 1945, towards the end of the Second World War. And of course, now many tourists are trying to find this treasure. During the COVID pandemic, the tourist movement was stopped, but now this legend is attracting the tourists again. So this is an issue of the so-called mindware factor of the strategies coping with the process of shrinkage. Przemyśl, as I have mentioned, is now a hub for Ukrainian refugees and military deliveries. Here we can see a direct impact of the war. This impact is most visible. I think this is an additional factor which has to be taken into consideration in our analysis in this project. And Konin is undergoing so-called green transformation. Here, this transformation has already started using EU Just Transition Fund. But what may be interesting for our Polish-Chinese colleagues, that a week ago, a Polish-Korean bilateral agreement was signed. A group, KNHP, is to deliver small nuclear reactors for power generation instead of brown coal predominated now. And also in this area, hot springs have been discovered. So a question arises, is it possible to transform a mining city into a spa, for instance? Yeah, another very interesting issue for our research. And of course, we can find many other interesting research questions for a comparative analysis. I have only 20 minutes, so at the end of my presentation, I would like to recommend you a part, of course, from our book on post-socialist shrinking cities, also an article of the process of shrinkage as a challenge for urban governance. And this issue during our seminar will be discussed by Przemysław. So at this moment, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Tadeusz, for the presentation. Very informative. Okay, and to save time, so let's move on to our third speakers. The third speaker is from China, Professor Wu Kang, and who is from the School of Urban Economics and Public Affairs in Capital University of Economics and Business. And his talk is about the growth and the shrinkage of cities in China. Wu Kang, please.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to. Oh, this is my first time to use this app. I'm still searching where I can.
I think it's the arrow point up. Yes, great.
Can you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe you can put it up.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to join this symposium and to show our research online. Today, I'm going to introduce a case study that focuses on Yiwu City, which is better known for its international trade in Southeast China. We would like to present our study from the following 5 sections. First of all, about the research background. As you may know, urban shrinkage is a development path that is spreading widely across the world. although this phenomenon is considered fairly global, its manifestations and determinants are multidimensional and complex and do not follow universal patterns.
Sorry, the slides is not moving.
Okay.
It's still on the first page. Yes, please share it, Kim.
Is it moving?
It didn't show.
Okay.
So you need to share it again. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay.
I think
So,
you can't put it up. You just
okay.
you just keep it in a small window.
Researchers have explored various explanations. In the more recent debate, the key theoretical literature has focused on the urban dynamics.
Sorry to interrupt. It's still not moving, the slides. I think you just keep it as a window view, not put it the full screen. I think that works. It works that way.
But actually, I have.
Oh, it's moving. Okay.
Is it moving?
It's moving now. It's working now.
Okay. So in the more recent debates, the key theoretical literature has focused on urban dynamics under capitalism and argues that the growth and shrinkage of cities are driven by the accumulation of capital and its spatio-temporal circulation. Furthermore, scholars currently emphasize the key role of globalization in the process of population change in cities nowadays. While globalization and global production networks accelerate the scope and the speed of capital circulation and foreign investment, which has resulted in the reconstruction of the global industry system and urban regional competition landscape. For the global cities, they have become the core of global economics. By comparison, other cities and even the entire regions were experiencing the outflow of capital and human resources and becoming the shrinking cities. For the Chinese context, most of the case studies and assumptions in terms of shrinking cities or urban shrinkage have been based on Western contexts. Despite growing signs of urban shrinkage in newly industrialized countries and developing countries, China has witnessed a world factory and a living laboratory of urbanization in the past 4 decades. Recent literature has highlighted the emergence of urban shrinkage in China. For example, in cities and regions that have endured sustained population loss, reflections on these issues have turned the second phase of urbanization toward a people-oriented and higher quality development model in China, which is supposed to enhance urban sustainability and reduce the disparity of region development in the long term. Existing studies have reported that cities with decreasing populations are generally associated with a weak GDP or a local fiscal growth rate, and can even become ghost cities in rapidly urbanizing China. Few studies have explored the more dimensional manifestations and complicated mechanisms combined with multi-source urban data. Besides the mining cities in Northeast China, we rarely learn about this trajectory and process in a Chinese context, especially the growth and shrinkage phenomenon for media and small industry or trade cities in Southeastern China. So this paper attempts to fill these research gaps. The next section about the methodology and data. In this research, we selected Yiwu city as the research area due to its emergence as a major national and international trade hub after opening up in China. As a country level city, Yiwu is affiliated with the prefectural level city of Jinhua, and it's just over 100 kilometers from Hangzhou, the provincial capital city of Zhejiang province. Upgraded from a county to a country level city in 1988, Yiwu is currently a pilot city for international trade and reform, and the first and only country level city to be targeted for national level reform. Yiwu is famous for its role as a petty market center and has the largest small commodities wholesale framework with a total transaction value of more than 400 billion yuan in 2018. As a minor city that has progressed from a county market to provincial, national, and even finally global market in 30 years, the trajectory of Yiwu has been dumped in the Yiwu model, which is characterized by the local government private entrepreneur partnership and of adaptation to new challenges as they emerged. As a successful development model that is being replicated, it faces changes going forward, especially how to shift from low cost, low quality manufacturing toward high value manufacturing. After the financial crisis in 2008, the arrival of e-commerce and efforts to upgrade production have seen many non-local workers or labor forces leave Yiwu. As a small to medium-sized city that lacks of the economies of scale in attracting higher tech industries and talent, the Yiwu model is entering a transition period. Being consistent with and extending from the existing literatures, we build an analytical framework to understand the dynamics of growth and shrinkage from 3 dimensions: population dimension, economy dimension, and the landscape dimension. And we also use a 3D model to according to the dynamics of growth and shrinkage between different dimensions. We classified the topologies of urban development into the following 4 types, which is continuous growth, transactional growth, potential shrinkage, and significant shrinkage. Continuous growth indicates a growth pattern in all 3 dimensions and shows a positive cycle within a city. Transactional growth indicates growth in the economy and land use, but shrinkage or stagnation in the population dimension. Potential shrinkage indicates growth in population and land use, while shrinkage or stagnation in the economic dimension. Significant shrinkage indicates a decline in the economic dimension and a decrease in population with an expansion in the urban land use. We also draw support from multi-source data. For the population dimension, we use the resident population to reflect the population variation for each jiedao or town in Yiwu city. For the economic dimension, the records of investment data among business enterprises were adopted to reflect the dynamics of economic activity. Lastly, we investigate the dynamics in an alternative way by using monthly lifetime light images to approximate the growth and shrinkage of Yiwu city by the change of NTL in every pixel. The next one is the spatial patterns of the growth and shrinkage in Yiwu. As we can see from the figure, basically, the urban development of EU showed a rapidly urbanization process along with some local shrinkage areas. From 2012 to 2018, more than 70% of townships were growing, accounting for nearly 30% were still facing the situation of shrinkage. The towns with the continuous growth included Choucheng and Jiangdong in the central. The transitional growth towns were mainly located on the periphery of towns with continuous growth. The towns with potential shrinkage was interspersed between towns with continuous growth and those with transitional growth. Finally, Chi'an, which is located in the southern EU, and Dacheng, Suxi, and Niansanli, which are located in the southern EU, are the concentration areas of significant shrinkage. The changing pattern of night light images shows the similar pattern with the distribution of growing and shrinking towns. Some transitional growth towns with potential shrinkage presented patterns of performance-rated shrinking similar to that seen in Western countries. We processed the NTL data separately for 2012 to 2015 and 2016 to 2018. The former period show more pervasive shrinkage, while most of the towns resumed growth after 2015, which indicate urban growth and shrinkage in fast urbanization China tend to fluctuate more compared to developed countries in the Western world. Well, for the mechanisms, according to the logic of the development of EU model, which is termed 3 pillars, we may conclude that at least 4 influencing factors that may contribute to the growth and shrinkage phenomena, namely changes in the domestic and foreign trade environment, a push toward industry transformation and upgrading, comprehensive renovation of the urban development and reform of the household registration system. These 4 influencing factors are not dependent, but have interactions with each other. For the impact of the international trade environment, as we may know, EU is an open city with higher integrated into the global value chain. International trade is an important external driving force of urbanization and also the driving force of the migration of the floating population. So the change of international trade environment has had a profound impact on the profitability of EU enterprises and then effect in investment and population. For the domestic market change, and the rising cost of land and labor and the rising price of raw materials in EU has led to most labor-intensive factories began to transfer to Southeast Asia and other inland areas in China, like Anhui province and Jiangxi province. In addition, many cities all over the country are trying to follow the EU model. So the EU commodity market is increasingly under the competition, under the competitive pressure from other domestic markets. More importantly, with the rise in cross-border e-commerce, an increasing number of foreign-funded enterprises have direct contact with manufacturers through cross-border e-commerce platform bypass traditional agents. The third one is the impact of machine replacement. Machine replacement replaced a large number of labor-intensive manufacturing labor force with robots, which greatly improved labor productivity and effectively reduced labor demand. This situation has greatly changed the employment structure of EU, eliminated low-skilled workers, and increased technical positions accordingly. However, due to the low technology and labor-intensive industry on the whole, in EU, the loss of population accelerates. In recent years, EU's market model has successfully changed from offline, leading to having online and offline integrated development, making EU the center of e-commerce in China. The development of the e-commerce economy has given rise to the growth of a large number of e-commerce service enterprises, new retail, express logistics, e-commerce platforms, and other new formats, creating a large number of jobs, which has great attractive for the population. In addition, the ecological industry chain of EU city is centralized and perfect, forming a comprehensive ecological industry chain in urban and rural areas that integrate online transactions, logistics and distribution, financial payment, and other fields. For the first aspects, under the pressure of environment protection policy, small workshops and factories in EU were hit. They could only adopt by clothing or employing immigration strategies to reduce employment demand. This promoted the outflow of the floating population. And lastly, reform of the household registration system. An increasing floating population was willing to settle down with the relaxation of the migration policy and the promotion of the equalization and the public services. So the main results of our research, the first is after 2008, EU shows a rapid urbanization process along with some local shrinkage areas. The growth areas were mainly in central EU, while shrinkage occurred in the northern and southern areas. The influencing factors that contributed to the growth and shrinkage phenomena in EU included domestic and international trade environment change, a push toward industry transformation and upgrading that was dominated by the government, comprehensive renovation of the urban environment, and reform of the household registration system. These factors are not independent, but rather are interrelated. Lastly, I think the main contribution for this research is include the building an analytical framework with 3 dimensions, expand the single dimensions of the understanding of urban growth and shrinkage from the population dimension to the economy dimension and population dimension, and also the landscape dimension. The second one is explore the referential multi-source data to explore the dynamics of the EU urban development in EU. And also we explore the dynamics and urban growth and shrinkage with Chinese characteristics. And lastly, we provided some implications for the urban planning community in China, especially for those small, medium cities. But due to the time limitation, I cannot tell you more details. And this research was published on the Journal of Urban Planning and Development in 2020. So if you guys interested in this paper, you can check this research paper online. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Kang, for the presentation. And your presentation gives us the big image of. I think although it's just a small city in EU, but I think for other cities in China, it's basically the same. And those places who are better linked with the global networks are growing, and those who are not are losing the population. So these are the three presentations we have in the first sessions, and Mario's talk says about the post-growth. The growth is not and should not be the only path moving forward. And the second and third presentations give us examples of those cities who are not being able to grow, so they lost their tracks. Okay, we still have like 5 minutes for discussion and questions. Anyone who wants to start a discussion, please open your mic or type in your words in the chat box. That's all okay.
Well, maybe I have a question for our Polish and Chinese friends, just to break the ice. I mean, you show some impressive data and some impressive research, and I was impressed by the rigors, no? But my question is that can we make a step forward and be a little bit more reflexive in terms of instead of just merely describing a phenomenon and try to understand the dynamics, no, the factors that influence growth of cities or abandonment of city, and try to understand how it's possible to arrive to a sort of governance in which we can together decide what is the right size of the urban space, because it seems that rise and fall of big city is not a new phenomenon, right? The fact that we are seeing these trends much more at the speed, the rate in which these cycles occurs is higher. But I can remember you that Rome in the classic Roman Empire was 1 million, and then in the Middle Age was 30,000 people, right? So this always happened. And in human history, my point is that can we, instead of merely like stopping at the level of analysis of why this is occurring, what are the economic factors, can we reflect about how it's possible to understand if we can reach a consensus on.
Some people want me to.
I mean, my point is that it's totally fine to understand these dynamics from what exists there. My point is that how can we create like a sort of like thinking to start talking about alternatives? No, what can we propose to people who wants to leave the shrinking city? Here in Spain, we have a big problem. It's called the España vaciada, means the empty Spain. No, that all the population. You see the graph. No, the graph is not just about energy. It's about works and jobs. So people are leaving the countryside because they don't have jobs. So that's why Madrid and Barcelona consume so much energy, right? So what can we say to those people who like to stay in their communities, right? So it's for me there is like a social aspect, a sociological aspect that's should be combined with the understanding of the economic factor and all the function and all the process that you show, guys, that I think they are very important. There is the other side, the sociological aspect, the cultural aspects, the imagining the future aspect, the aspiration of people, that is equally important, no? Maybe this is not a question, maybe this is just a reflection, but
it's a very interesting topic to discuss. So anyone who wants to respond?
Because otherwise everything is reduces to an economic factors, no? We need to create the economic sorry, Sophia, I interrupt you.
No, I interrupted you.
No, go on.
Well, I'm obviously on the same page as you, and I think if we don't have time to discuss it now, then definitely at the end, because my presentation thinks about these questions. Its focuses these questions. So hopefully that will provide like more of a framing.
Yeah, if I can say something, we also divided our presentation into two parts. So the title of my was Drivers, Scales and Geographies. So its purpose was to describe the process of urban shrinkage. And Przemysław Ciesiłka at the end of our session will present governance issues, attempts at regeneration processes, and this social aspect will be included in his presentation. Yeah, so please wait until the end of our conference, and maybe you will answer. You will find answer to your questions. I fully agree that this social, cultural aspect is very important, and we propose on it was also, you also have mentioned this issue that the process of shrinkage can be a chance for qualitative changes in cities. For instance, the improvement of living conditions. Yeah, many flats are becoming empty, so in Poland we could observe a shortage of flats. So it is a chance simply to fulfill demand in this matter, but also many actions which are trying to transform industrial areas into places of meetings, of social meetings, co-working spaces, offering new chances for people. Yeah, but all these things will be discussed in the next paper, so I don't want to enlarge this issue now. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I just add that I'm not sure if I will answer all your questions, Mario, but I will try to answer it. Yeah.
Okay, then let's move on to our session 2. Mario, and I hand over to you to moderate the section 2. Okay. Mario.
I'm here.
Hey. We can move on to the section 2, and over to you.
Okay, so in the session 2, we have other, sorry, they are calling me. Okay, so we have 4 other presentation rights. So the next one is Professor, I'm sorry for the pronunciation. My Chinese is not, my Mandarin is not like top. So the next presenter is Lin Bing.
Oh, yes,
and Luan Shangfan. Yeah. And they are talking about the title is Land Financialisation and Statecraft within authoritarian regimes. And I think that they will show us another case from China, from Wuhan. So, Professor Lin,
oh, yes.
The floor is yours.
I'll try to share my screen. I'm not so familiar with the team operation. Oh, yes. It works? Can you see my screen? No?
No.
You still don't see it.
Oh. Yeah, share the window. Microsoft.
So which button you're pushing? I think the one with the arrow up.
Yes, maybe the problem is the system that blocked it. I need to go to
Okay, this works now.
system preference. System preference to
So what's the problem? You're not able to share the file or the screen?
Yes, the problem is I need to go to the system preference and give the permit for Teams to the record. So I need to go to the. It's not just.
Yeah, that's a classic. Maybe we should.
If you can move to the next one, maybe it's helpful.
Maybe we should go to the next one. Przemek. It's Przemek, right?
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
So I try to share my screen right now. Yeah. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So is it full screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my name is Specificities, and I will try to talk to you a little bit more about urban regeneration in Poland. So I'd like to introduce you this process, project process, which is right now very important in Poland. And my presentation will be a kind of continuation of Tadeusz's presentation. But firstly, a few words about the beginning of our event, because as Tadeusz said, also Kai mentioned, and Adam as well, in the beginning of this year, we are preparing together a project proposal. We want to conduct a joint research in the future, and at the end of this process of preparing this proposal, we were talking with Kai, and we noticed that in fact we still don't know a lot about regeneration, about shrinking cities in Poland and in China. So we decided that we need to get to know a little bit more, and this was the beginning of this event. Then our Spanish, Italian colleagues join us. So this is the very beginning of this event. So I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to talk about regeneration, to deal with different point of views on regeneration, on shrinking cities. And as Adam said, our dean said, I hope it's a beginning of the conference which will take place every year, for example. Yes, so let's move on to the outline of my presentation. So firstly, I will give a short introduction. Then I will focus on the purpose and methods. And then I will try to analyze some theoretical backgrounds. After that, I will talk about evolution of regeneration strategy in Poland. Finally, I will try to explain how regeneration in Poland is understood and being implemented. And at the end, I will give some conclusions. Okay, so as Tadeusz said, in Poland, we observed this transition from command to market-oriented democratic system. It was connected with decline of traditional industry, social degradation, also demographic changes, as well as degradation of city centers. And finally, suburbanization, which is in fact the most important process in Poland from an urban point of view, which is taking place right now. So these elements we can sum up as urban shrinkage. Urban shrinkage, which is observed in Poland, but also in many other Central European countries. We still focus with this process right now in Poland. In fact, in Eastern Germany, this process is not so serious right now. It's not such a big problem as it was in the past. In Poland, we still need to focus. We still need to deal with this phenomena. So one way to deal with this process, with this problem of shrinkage, is urban regeneration. Urban regeneration, which is main policy for urban development, not only in Poland, but also in many other Central and Eastern European countries. But at the same time, we know that urban regeneration is not always the same. There's no one prescribed form of urban regeneration practice. In every country, we are trying to deal with this process in a little different way. So I would like to get you familiar with this process in Poland. In Poland, where in 2021, more than 20% of population lived in areas identified as needing regeneration. We can find these areas not only in shrinking cities, but also in stable, but as well as in growing places. So this is a process which is taking place in almost every city in Poland. So during my presentation, I would like to identify and evaluate legal and strategic factors influencing urban regeneration in Poland. I will use qualitative content analysis of legislations and policy documents, but I will also try to develop expert view on this process, because I was engaged in many regeneration processes. I was responsible for preparing many regeneration programs, for example, for Poznań, for many medium-sized cities. So I will also give my personal view on this process, my own observations. Let's start with this traditional model of evolution of urban regeneration, model which was developed in Western European countries. Evolution from reconstruction to regeneration. In this evolution, we observed a different way of major strategies and orientations. We observed different spatial level of activity, key actors and stakeholders. But what about post-socialist cities, post-socialist countries? Because in these countries, in fact, we didn't deal with regeneration before systemic transformation. We focused with this idea to regenerate cities after transformation. So we didn't somehow pass this evolution of urban regeneration, which was observed in Western European countries and United States as well. So I think that a good idea to explain this process is a concept of path dependence. I think it's fit very well to a good understanding of urban regeneration in Poland and also in other Central European countries. I think we had two very important moments. First one is, first critical juncture was the accession to the European Union and allocation of the money, EU funds for implementation of regeneration projects. And another important moment for regeneration was introduction of legal regulations. So it was a lock-in for regeneration. After European Union, we had many ways how to deal with regeneration. We have many ways to prepare regeneration strategies. After introduction new legal regulations, we have only one way to deal with regeneration in Poland. So this situation in Poland is, from one point of view, very similar to other situations in other countries, Central European countries, but on the other side, it differs a little bit because when I was analyzing regeneration process in other Central European countries, in Slovakia and in Bulgaria, I noticed that they didn't have this lock-in moment. They did not introduce legal regulations which are focused mainly on regeneration. They have more general legal regulations. So regeneration is not analyzed very deeply in these countries. And when we think about public policy, on the other hand, in Eastern Germany, a critical juncture and lock-in moment was in fact in the same moment. So it's also a little bit different from this point of view. Situation in Poland may be very interesting examples to analyze, to deal with. So let's move on to this transition from command to market-oriented democratic system again. When we are thinking about regeneration, before 1990, we didn't have any regeneration policy in Poland, only reconstruction of some old city centers, a very simple process. Construction of large panel housing estates was a dominant process. After 1990, we observed very early tries to deal with regeneration. We were trying to use some experiences from Western European countries, from France, from Germany, from United Kingdom and Poland. But in fact, we didn't have any funds for regeneration. We didn't have legal regulations in Poland. Situation has changed dramatically after EU accession. EU accession means was connected with some guidelines for regeneration. EU funds was the basic way of financing regeneration process in next years. So EU guidelines defined a leading role of local authorities in regeneration in Poland, specific ways of involving stakeholders in regeneration, guidelines for preparing programs, for implementing projects. So definitely it was a critical juncture for regeneration in Poland. After that, we are trying to spend EU funds for regeneration. In the beginning of this process, we focused mainly on physical changes during this regeneration process. Regeneration was definitely poorly communicated to residents. We didn't have any legal regulations. At the end of this process, before introduction of legal regulations, we were trying to somehow evaluate how we deal with regeneration in Poland. We are trying to move on to more social problems, to more social project that we were trying to implement in Poland. There was a growing interest in regeneration among the community. We were trying to introduce very simple methods of public participation, but we didn't have still legal regulations. So Urban Regeneration Act was the lock-in moment. In Poland, we received very precise criteria how to program, implement, monitor regeneration. In Poland, a participatory approach was introduced to regeneration. We focused on integrated planning, on social aspects in regeneration. And right now, regeneration is an important element of Polish national strategy, also of national recovery and resilience strategy. We observe an emphasis on environmental aspects. So this is the evolution of a process. So how regeneration look like right now? Of course, we have many very good regeneration projects in Poland, but together with some glories of regeneration, we observe also some shadows of this process. So urban regeneration in Poland right now is in the legal sense a public policy. It means that activities which are undertaken by private investors, we shouldn't call as a regeneration, of course, from this legal point of view. So it may be confusing that when we are talking about regeneration, we are thinking, is it regeneration or is it not regeneration? When we analyze legal regulations, regeneration is something that we can find in regeneration program. If this project or action is not appearing in regeneration program, in fact, we shouldn't call it as a regeneration in Poland. We also observe a very dominant role of local authorities. They are somehow the main actor of this process, key actor of this process. They decide who can also involve in regeneration process. Then they decide if NGOs, business, or private managers can be somehow engaged in this process because they decide about including these actors in regeneration programs. So they this role is very important. Urban regeneration is considered as a very integrated process from a legal point of view, but still we observe we observe that in many ways, in many aspects, regeneration is treated separately from spatial planning. So this we have, for example, in local authorities, different departments responsible for regeneration and different departments responsible for spatial planning. At the same time, regeneration is often misused. We are naming as a regeneration many processes which are focused only on physical changes, on innovation, on upgrading of spaces. But when we look to legal regulations, social problems are the main important element, should be the main important element of this process. We observe in Poland that EU funds are the main source of funding of regeneration process. We received some subsidies, but at the same time some loans for regeneration. Private funds, we may think that private funds don't play such important role in regeneration, but as I mentioned earlier, private projects are not included in regeneration project very often. So they are also not included in statistics. So in fact, we didn't know how these private projects are being implemented, how they influence people's lives. We don't have it, for example, in statistics. Another important aspect of regeneration in Poland is that we are trying to implement right now many social projects, which is a result of some social problems that we observed. But
sorry.
Przemek, sorry, we cannot hear.
Do you hear me right now?
Yes.
And did you hear my previous presentation?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So maybe some problems with my Teams. So coming back to this slide. So we observe in Poland that social problems are the main aspect of regeneration, but at the same time, environmental aspects play not enough important role in this process. So many times we observe that this process of concentrosis, so it means betonoza, concentrosis, often is this process associated with regeneration in Poland. So, for example, there are places which looks much worse after regeneration to the situation before regeneration. almost last aspect that I like to analyze is the public participation. It's a highly formalized element of the regeneration process in Poland right now. So local authorities are obligated to use many forms of public consultation during the regeneration process. But in the same time, they use usually very simple forms of public participation. There is obligation of established regeneration committee, which is a social body which advise local authorities. But in fact, in these regeneration committees, very often we observe that only local authorities want to talk about regeneration. Residents are not involved in this process because they don't want to do it. So it is also very important from my point of view. And last thing that I would like to deal with is gentrification. Gentrification, which is almost inherent element of the regeneration process in Poland. We don't develop in Poland instruments which are able to somehow fight with this process. So regeneration in the beginning should solve some social problems, but that at the end it means that gentrification is appealing. So it's also very confusing from what I said in the beginning, from this social focus in regeneration process that we wanted to implement based on legal regulations or strategic regulations. So to sum up, Polish model of urban regeneration is, I think it's a very good model, but we have many problems with implementation of this model. Only few cities think that regeneration is a key idea how the cities should develop. We have a dominance of community project, but we still have in mind our old thinking about regeneration, that it's a process concerning mainly physical changes. We are trying to develop participatory approach, but I think that it's still on the very early stage of this participatory approach in Poland. And finally, gentrification, which is observed very often in Poland. We need to deal with this process or problem, but in fact we still don't have enough money to deal with this gentrification process. So this is another challenge for us, how we should try to develop regeneration process in Poland in the future. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention. Sorry, yeah, my presentation was a little longer than I expected, but I hope it was interesting for you. Yeah. So
thank you very much, Przemek. I think it's that you touched several super interesting points. One is very relevant in my research, which is co-production in science and innovation. We have a lot of tokenist instrumental approach to participation. No? On one hand, you have the rhetoric of we need to include citizens, but then the inclusion of citizens is instrumental. It's one directional. It's not really like co-production. Okay, so next presentation, I see that Professor Lee managed to share the slides. So the floor is yours. Professor Lee is from the University of Macau, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you have 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Please stay within the time, please.
Inconvenience. And thanks for Mario, and thanks for Professor Zhou to invite us to have this presentation. Our topic is about land financialization as a statecraft within authoritarian regime, the case of Zhongshan Revenue Regeneration Project in Wuhan City. And I'm Ben Li from City University of Macau, and Professor Nuan Xiaofan, who comes from Wuhan University, we are co-authors. We have kind of 4 parts of this presentation. First is introduce the case. Second one, go back to the literatures about statecraft and financialization. Then we go back to the case and analyze the case within the background of land commodification and financialization from the statecraft perspective. Finally, we go to the further analysis about the speed risks and the imitation within this Chinese authoritarian regime. Let's go to the case. Okay. Have it been blocked? No. Okay. I don't know what happened, but the pictures has disappeared. So we only have the words. It's no problem. It still works because the majority of our presentation are the text. So there are four or five pictures to show the case, which is in the historical center of Wuhan, and this regeneration project organized between 2014 and 2016. It's a very kind of successful urban regeneration project in terms of the standard of urban planning and urban regeneration globally. And it has won the award of excellence of ISO-CAP in 2016 as the kind of best practical project in this year. And this project is good in terms of its reducing constructions, reducing demolition, and only relocating some inappropriate and illegal functions and buildings, and release space for public facilities and open to everybody free of charge. And the public transport are encouraged in this project, and the communication has fully supported in terms of its design. So basically, ideology about urban planning have almost fully reflected in this project, and is a winner of the prize. So our question is, who paid for it? The cost of this project is about 1 billion Chinese yuan. So it's a huge amount of money. There is almost no land revenue generated from this project. So the developer or the government will get nothing from the project. So how to finance such a pure project, public interest-led project within such a entrepreneurial and authoritarian local state? There are kind of two mechanisms. The first, to try to do the land package and the land leasing to win the money back. Basically, this project and another project, the Green Way around the Dong Lake, Donghu, which cost almost 2.5 billion CNY. So these two projects have been combined as one to be financed. And there are 4 parts of land which are far away from the sites, will be distributed to the operator, the developer of these 2 projects, which is Wuhan Real Estate Group. This 4 land will be distributed to them and will be leased to commercial developers to win the money back. And this win back, the money will be paid for these 2 projects. However, this kind of land passing, the land packaging, and the land leasing mechanism have been stopped, being cancelled due to the new policy in 2016. We will go back to this new policy later. So to recover the cost, another mechanism, the funding pool, have been applied. The funding pool, which means they have the kind of money, the capital from the 2 base ways. One is from the land leasing and in the formal stages. Another one is from the national bank system. These loans have 2 categories. First one is just pure credit based on the credit of this Wuhan Real Estate Group. The amount is limited. The second one is based on this ready for leasing land for the pledge. The second method contributes to the major resource of the funding pool. In terms of the borrowing, it's quite interesting for us to find that this WEG, this kind of national, the local state-owned developer can get the loans from the national bank through mortgaging the minutes, the summary, and the record of the conference as the credit to win the loans, to get the money. So basically, such a few of official papers, they are just the minutes, just the recording of the conference, which in the conference have decided which land will be distributed to the WREG in the future. But this land have not been known to this WEG, the developer. Actually, it's just an official promise, and these minutes can be mortgaged by the national bank to get the loans, and the loans will pay for these two projects. And this is our kind of a question. It's why the meeting summary can be a credit of mortgage between WREG and the banks, and how it works, in which kind of condition it works. These questions will be analyzed from the perspective of statecraft and financialization in our study case. So we have this case, sorry. So we have the case, and then we have the analytic perspective, the statecraft and the financialization. Statecraft, which is originally defined by Burpitt in 1986. And this kind of art of winning election and achieving some necessary degree of governance competence in the office. And this approach is quite useful because it tries to use an agency central perspective rather than structural central perspective to analyze the black box of making decisions and operating strategic interactions. Such an agency central perspective pay attention to the collective leaders, the court, rather than the separated individuals. These members are analyzed within their structural constraints, which affect their initiatives, behaviors, and strategies. By these constraints, statecraft can focus on how coming leaders to maximize their power and their influence. And these analyses have four key elements. The first one is the structural constraint for the court, for the members who can achieve their goals. There are some constraints. The second one is the resources, external political resources, which support the court. And the third one is the strategies. The strategy is the court to act to achieve the goals under the constraint and use their resources. Finally, is the court, which one is most interesting because the code sometimes is unobservable, which is in the black box. But this approach aims to analyze this kind of hidden code within this within the code, their actions, their strategies. So there are some kind of advantages for this approach to analyze the nature of policy changes. First one is agency central. Second one is kind of collectively exercising the power, not just one, but the court. Third one, the statecraft method have been developed by a lot of the scholars in different kind of aspects to combine observable and unobservable phenomena. This is kind of key interesting point for us to analyze it. And we go to the second topic is financialization. We think financialization is kind of hot topic in human geography for years. But if we take it from a structural perspective, it's very kind of quite obviously to criticize the selective outcomes of the local state to operating financialization, such as the increasing of inequality and the kind of the just lost the public interests, and the local state maybe lost their control of the city to investors such as international financial capital. This kind of elective outcomes is quite easy to see, but if we put agency central vision, such as the statecraft, maybe it is a different interpretation. Local leaders face their constraints, and this financialization might be their best choice. In terms of the constraints, we would like to say within an inter-city competition, as established by neoliberal environment, local state are no longer just a public service provider or pure supporter under the market mechanism. However, it becomes a speculator itself. But within this, in terms of this rule, such an entrepreneurial city have to face its limits. More precisely, financial constraint imposed by central state after 2008 financial crisis is the main constraint. There's not enough financial support from the central state, so the city have to help itself. However, they need to win the kind of intercity competition for the kind of fluid investment and the capital. So such a constraint as a financial austerity have weakened the capacity of municipal government to win the intercity competition. So they have to win, right? So it's the kind of they have to use their resources. What is their resources? They have kind of the institutions they can make. They can create new institutions, such regulations and new ownerships. And among the regulations, urban planning is kind of most important instrument because it's controlled by the local state and can reduce uncertainty through governmental guarantees. So the urban planning is kind of another resources. Not only planning tools, but other kind of governance mechanisms, such as can better ensure financial returns, while financialization often lead to the risks of financial capital. So transformation from the real estate into liquid based on a well-functional financial market. This is kind of the resource for the Western countries, Western cities to operate financialization. So there are three strategies within financialization. First one is the local state creates condition which enable urban space valuable and available for investors. The second, decrease risks both in transaction and in the process after the deal have made between the local state and the financial investors. The third, managing conflicts between interest groups, between stakeholders in financialized urban building environment, such as infrastructure, is the third strategy for the local state to operate financialization. Behind this kind of interaction, there are three causes. First, liquidity, become liquid is kind of the code for urban value based on the space is become liquid is preferred. It's kind of the code for the financialization. Second, financialization is potentially more profitable, but its risks are coming along these benefits. To control these possible risks, especially decrease the risks for investors, is a main task for local state. And lastly, among this kind of different interests from different groups, international financial capital have the highest level of priority to get the profit and to reduce the risks. So the key is how to increase efficiency and at the same time manage the risks. For this research, I mean, for the research from the financialization and the statecraft, it's kind of based on the democratic political system and the mature financial market. But in China, in terms of authoritarian regime, political regime, and in terms of kind of not mature financial market, even if it's not a market in some sense, what did happen? How to understand its financialization, financialization in terms of statecraft? So we're back to the case from within statecraft perspective. Chinese communist the regime have described as a pro-growth authoritarian regime within last 40 years. Economic growth is a central issue for the local leaders to pursue their political returns. Such initiatives have been remained for years. However, the constraint, the context, the environment have been changed in different stages, which result in various statecraft in different stages. So we go back to the first stage. We call it the land commodification 1.0. Start from 1988. The constraint is the socialist legacy is quite negative in terms of the fragmented infrastructure and the low productivity of the urban land. So this kind of the heritage from the socialist period. To pursue the economic growth, I think it needs something new. So the Shenzhen government in the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone have experiment to lease the land to investors through open auction in 1987. This kind of experiment have been legitimized by the institutional constitutional change in 1988. And this kind of example in Shenzhen has inspired other Chinese cities. So this kind of Shenzhen's experiment becomes a resource for other cities, such as Wuhan, to learn to improve land use efficiency to raise fiscal income from this kind of land selling process. So the strategy is mobilize more actors to capitalize land stock when investment are scale in the early stage of reform, which means you can use this land to be leased to developers or the other investors, or you can use this land as a kind of a stake to have a stake share to join this development. So the land become commodification. So this is the first strategy for the local state and other actors, such as also SOEs, to pursue the economic growth. And within this period, the code is urban land as a fixed capital become tradable in the market. To stimulate active land market, no state actors are encouraged to join this land transfer. Risks mainly exist among the market actors. And then we'll go to the second one. Because the first stage, everybody have been encouraged to join this kind of competition in urban land market. So such competition become a constraint for local leaders to maximize their incomes, their revenues, because everyone else can win something. So the local state, as kind of the leader of the city, they try to maximize their income. They try to limit other actors' choice and freedoms in this market. So this kind of constraint is the city government have the potential to get more money from this land market, but others, they have reduced or stopped this kind of instincts. So they need to overcome these constraints. The resource is within the institutional capacities inherited from the reform period. It's unchanged authoritarian regime. Local government have resources to regain its monopolizing power in land market. So in 2004, central government has announced that all land leads to the developed urban commercial function must be go through competitive channels, such as open auction, which is monopolized by the local state. So finally, the local state have controlled everything in the land market. The open auction is the only choice for the developers, and the open auction is operated and controlled by a local state. After these resources, the Shanghai municipal government has the first one to build its land reserve institution, Touchu, in 1996 to fully control the land supply. And the Wuhan city, with the case we have studied, follows this step in 2000. So this is a key strategy in the second stage. The code in this period is the local government has not focused on increasing land energy or land productivity efficiency. Rather, the principle was more concerned land leasing fees as the most important resource for local revenue. Risks have been transferred from the local government as a sole sale to the buyers, which are the developers or other market actors in competitive land market. And after this, we can see Shanghai, they are kind of comfortable because they have a relatively more prosperous real estate market, which need the reliable land revenue sources. However, Wuhan, which is an inland city, which has less active market, its government cannot expect such a stable income from land leasing, such as Shanghai had. So Wuhan had to do something differently. So Wuhan government is not prefer the low price leasing because they they expect high price in the future when the market have been rising within a monopolized land market. So they have something new. What's the resources for this kind of innovation? The LGFV, the local government financial vehicle, as a financial arm of the local state to borrow from the national bank. And the national bank are glad to lend to the LGFV because their accounting principles, their principles are encouraged to borrow to the LGFV. The government, local government, have been forbidden to borrow directly from the national bank, but these vehicles, they are owned or controlled by the local state. They can borrow from the national bank. And in terms of this, they have the strategies, the service land mortgage, which means the LGFV can borrow from the national bank, so mortgage in service land which have been owned by the local state. So you can say the land is the serviced and owned by the local state. The code is an institutional innovation in less developed region, such as Wuhan, different from Shanghai. Short-term risks and long-term safety in land market are established, and the local state, because they can control this system, the market actors are consumers. They will take the risks. And the last stage, or the stage we have the case, is after 2008, which is very specific to Wuhan, the city. Mr. Yuan Chunfa, who is the mayor of Wuhan between 2007 and 2016, have won support from the leader of the Hubei province. And this mayor need to get his political performance just within his term. So it's a time limit. Come back to the resource. This kind of period is just after 2008, after the global financial crisis. The Chinese government have established the Chinese economic stimulus program, which have 4 trillion Chinese yuan from the central state. This kind of the special resource, and others are similar to different the former stage. So within this period, the mayor have the support from the higher level, and the Chinese central government have a huge amount of money. So this strategy for the mayor is try to grasp more money within less limited, shorter time period. So they use the unserved land mortgage, which means LGFV can borrow from national bank through mortgaging unserved land which have not been owned by the local state yet. Even we talk the official minutes of the government conference to arrange future land ownership can be the mortgage. So it's kind of extreme case for the mortgaging. The credit is not really the land, it's the political credit. Within this, the code is the time window-led institutional innovation. Political credit can be transformed to economical credit. The whole system has risks, and the central state is the lender of last resort. The last saver is the central state. But we have the 4 stages can be described in terms of its market situation, in terms of its supply is consumer, and in terms of its market signal, and the transaction between with property right or not. Lastly, about the risks in different stages. Basically, the last stage, land financialization, is extremely risky. And the leverage is based on power, not based on the land values. The leverage is kind of uncountable from the market perspective. However, we argue that this kind of market condition is not really a market condition. It's an imitation of the market. It's not the fake market. It's not the quasi market. It's an imitation of the market. We will go through, not really in the beginning. We go through the third point. I mean, in the period of the last period, its appearance of market have been remained. However, the nature have been changed because the government and the prices and the banks, it seems, are actors of the market. However, it's not really actors of the market. It's actors of the authoritarian power system. They acting as very different actors to realize the purpose of the local state. So we argue that these actors, it seems they are acting in the market and they have their market rule, but actually they are tools, are instrument for the local state to pursue their purpose. And within this period, you can see the signal is not the market signal. The transaction is not based on the property rights, and the risk is not about the market risks. It's based on the power, the political risks, because you can borrow through the political credit, and the national bank borrow lend these loans due to the political credit. And this peak stage displays both highest level of efficiency and the risks, which lead to the intervention from the central state, which means the fourth stage, the land financialization 2.10, is the highest level of the speed for the capital to move within the land market, and the risks is based on there is no real mortgage, there is no real credit. It's a political guarantee for the system to run this kind of mortgage. And this whole system is controlled by the state, and the enterprises and the banks sometimes act as a market player, sometimes as not. The driving force behind them are the wills of the local state. And finally, this kind of extreme stage of financialization has been stopped by the central state to announce the new policy to stop such a crazy mortgaging mechanism, 属地抵押, in 2016, which means it is really a risk of politics, which means if the central state will not stop them, the local state and the national bank and the LGFA, they can run this system with capital, with power, but without any real market mechanisms, such as the credit, such as the market signal.
Sorry, Bing, I have to ask you to wrap up because we are extending the limits. This is
my final slide. So basically, this is the case. We see the risk can be kind of enormous, and the risks can be controlled in a relatively short term by authoritarian regime, because it's not a real market mechanism. It's artificial. It's an imitation of the market. So it's the power to control the risks. However, the risks can be accumulated in long term because the low efficiency of imitation market mechanism and price signal does not work in such an authoritarian environment. So finally, the party state controls everything, but eventually people will pay everything by themselves, including the prices, the result risks in the long term, in the future. That's our presentation, and thanks for your patience.
Okay, thank you a lot. So now the next presentation is Kai, and he's going to present a comparative study between the US, China, and Czech Republic cities. Okay. Kai, please stay in the 20 minutes, otherwise we will not have time for the final discussion. Same for Sophia later.
Okay. Can you see my screen or hear me? Can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I'll start it. Okay, thank you for this opportunity to share my result, my research. And today I will talk about a comparative research. Basically, we compare the governance of 3 shrinking cities, one from China, one from the United States, and one from the Czech Republic. While we are doing that, there's a lot of researches about to identify the shrinking cities and how they are shrinking. But there's only a small portion of the study has focused on the governance of the urban shrinkage. From what we know now, it is clear that although the shrinking cities are very basically the same, losing population is a global phenomenon, but the policy response that are designed to counter the trends are quite different in different culture and in different political contexts. And we found that the of the political willpowers or leadership and can shape different policy choices. And the different policy choices have a strong incidence of how the fate of the shrinking cities, whether they can recover or whether they cannot, or getting worse. And so we find that could be valuable to have this cross-national comparison to see how in different contexts, in different countries, how a shrinking city discourse leads to the policy actions. There are two research questions worth noticing here, worth exploring here. First, we try to understand the contextual factors, what moves the idea into politics. And also we try to, by comparing the different situations, to find more policy options. Are they something we can learn from each other? So that's the reason we're doing this comparison. So the three co-authors of this paper are putting together three case studies, one from Fuxing in China, one is from the United States, it's the New Bedford, and one is from the Czech Republic, Ústí de Labem. And those cities are all shrinking cities, and they are losing population. They have implemented some policies to retrieval their economy, but not very successfully. So our comparison is to discover why so, and why they are not working. So before we go to the case studies, we need to build a conceptual basis for our analysis. When you looking at the literatures of shrinking cities, so people are generally accept that urban shrinking is an impact by the global or regional drivers, and the local and the city government need to respond. If they fail to respond, the situation will be getting worse. So based on that assumptions, that the policy response to the shrinkage is a multi-level thing, from the local to global, and also involves different roles, like public figures and private investors. So it is a multi-level governance of urban shrinkage. And the other very important things to remember is that the urban shrinkage or shrinking cities is very unpopular among politicians or decision makers. They don't want to hear this. I believe the post-growth era is also very unpopular in a way, but why so? Because if we're looking at those shrinking cities, we can use some numbers to evaluate or find what are they, but what we really need to understand is the motivation of local players for adapting to the shrinking mode and manage it. Why they need to admit they are shrinking, and how they can manage it better. So in the current literatures, there's a large debate on the acceptance or recognition. That's those officials just don't want to accept they are shrinking, or they cannot recognize the problems. But is that really the situation? We found that when we're talking to the local officers, I think the situation is more complex than that. In many cases, local representatives, they know they are the population is decreasing, and it's like they maintain the official mental records of the city is declining, but they know they are shrinkage. But when they are writing public reports and when they are speaking, they need to keep a projected growth path to the publics. So it's not only a sign of ignorance or they fail to recognize the problems, but to take a very practical position for that. And if we try to understand their way of thinking, we find that there's a paradox of confession. On the one hand, if the regional actors aim to establish the proper policies and strategies, they must accept and respect the real situation and the problems. They must know their status, their losing population. On the other hand, if they confess or underline the shrinking mode, and that could discourage investors or individuals to come into their cities, so making things worse. So they were stuck in this the paradox of confession. And if you look at the bigger pictures, like this overall cognitive aspects, for example, I think most people will agree that a healthy city always grows, and they think that only the unhealthy one are shrinking. So that's more like that. And when we talk about how to manage your city, maybe the governance model, maybe the growth-oriented or pro-growth governance is probably the most easy way, or less the challenges to understand. If you propose other paths, that's more challenging for people to accept. So because of that, the pro-growth coalition between the private companies and the council officers has formed to adapt this pro-growth governance type, and quite naturally, everything otherwise they will fight against, such as shrinking cities. So that's the understanding of that. But if we look most deeper to that questions, why they cannot choose a different path, we find that the real motivation for the local actors to maintain on the positive pro-growth path is that, like Professor Li Bing present, they have this financial consideration. The main financial resource of the city budget somehow is linked to the growth, the continuous growth. In order to have that budget, they need to serve the specific local interest group. So I think the money is quite important in this place. When we compare the cases in China and also in Central Europe, we find that in different ways, the city budget is somehow depends on the size of the city, of the population, either by the property tax or by the transfer payments from the central government. So you have to regain the population, or you have to keep the city growing so that you have more money to spend. So that money is very important issue raised by the local government. And talking about the source of local revenue, for the shrinking cities, they are quite careful about that. There are two ways of having money for the city. One is from the market, from the tax or something like that. And the other way is from the central government, from the welfare system. So this reflects the debates of the individualism or the collectivism of the governance of urban shrinkage. And so we have a long history of using the welfare systems to help the disadvantages or help the cities like shrinking cities to relocate or locate the public resource to solve their problems. And by using some national or regional agencies or using social welfare systems, something like that. But I think all the planners will remember that due to some failures of some highly controversial urban renewal projects in the post-war areas in United Kingdom or United States, that welfare policy is not quite popular, and we don't think that is the right way to doing that in those countries. So the neoliberal path was invented or get more popular. So following the neoliberal approach, the localism governance is getting more popular in shrinking cities now. Now they are relying on private sectors or public-private partnership to develop the city or redevelop the city. But this approach is not working quite well, in my sense. Otherwise, we don't need to talk about the shrinking city problem now. So that's why they call the shrinking cities weak market cities. That means the markets didn't or can't do the work. But outside the United States and the United Kingdom, but this top-down approach, or somehow called a consolidationist policy, remain an options. Like in the Western states of Europeans, they still have the way of using national public resources to address the local problems. And in some post-socialism, at least the European countries, the state and local ties are still strong. So they can still use the EU funds or national funds to do regeneration. And also in some East Asians like Japan and China, the city government or the national government has strong roles in allocated resources. So they can still do something to help the shrinking cities. So that is the basic theoretical background or conceptual basis for our analysis. So back to our 3 case studies. The Fuxing case study is in China, so it adopts quite a centralist approach. The national government and the provincial government did a lot of things to help him, and the New Bradford in the United States, like other cities in the America, and they are very local, adopt a localist approach. And the one Statecraft is the indirect centralism. So they kind of a mix of top-down and bottom-up approach. Like I said, all 3 cities losing population by applying some policies, but they all fail to achieve what they want to revival the shrinking city. But how? So let's analyze each cases using the conceptual basis we have, how they are recognizing their problems. In the case of Fuxing, because it was an industrial city and start to have this economic downturn after the open up process of China, so their problem is this unemployment and pollution and the decline of total population and diminishing the glory of the past and the rising social instability. So that's the problem. And what motivate them to adapt the shrinking mode and managing it is because this city has been listed as one of the typical resource depleted city from the central government. So the central government decided to help those cities to regain their growth. So that's how they accept the role, accept their shrinking. And so the policy of Fuxing are formed mostly top-down from the central government, from the provincial government. They gave their money, they gave their projects, they designated a lot of laws, like Li Bing has reported, and they command the state-owned enterprise to set up factories there to help them. So the operation of this policies are quite top-down. And so because it's top-down, so the supervision of to evaluation the outcome of those policies are also top-down. So local government, the deeds of local governments was supervised by the upper level agents. So this is the Fuxing case. In New Bedford, the United States, how they are recognize their problems is because this city was a port city. It has been losing population for 70 years or something. And now they are recognize the problem as a demographic change is the biggest problem. It's a biggest problem for them. They have fewer residents, a smaller household, a lot of less occupied houses and high poverty rate. And because they are cheap, the house is cheap, so there are influx of African Americans and the long white Hispanics also. So that's and they are not very desirable for the typical white residents. And the motivation for them to accept their shrinkage mode and try to manage it is they accepting that they has to accepting the demographic change. They have to do something to manage the change. So they adopt the right sizing to make a smaller city for smaller population, and they call that smart shrinkage. So that's how they formulate the policies. So the policies are taking the localist approach of a bottom-up. The city leaders and the local governments were expected to be visionaries and managing the demographic change. And the operation of those processes are using a mix of diverse policy and strategies and cooperate between the city officers and community leaders and business interests. They regenerate the city core, like the image on the left, and to regenerate to go with the business, with the local government, with the community. So that's quite a participatory and a local community plan approach. And the way they evaluate the effects are quite based on the market response and how the general publics were taking that. So this is the story of the New Bedford in the United States. For the Czech Republic cases, quite similar to what CIMAX was reported, it's how they recognize the shrinkage is by because the city or the country has been through the transformative period. So during that period, the degradation or marginalization of the regions economically and politically has been widely recognized. And the job loss or population loss are quite common. So that's the problem. And also the motivation for adapting to the shrinking model is to consider the shrinkage was considered as a challenge in this transformation period. So they need to be through that to adapt to that. And their policies are formulated firstly, and they ask the local authority to do something. Then they find it's not working. Then they take it back to the central level to use the national resource orders, the EU resources to do regeneration or other stuff. So the operations was then first was given to the local and then take back. The supervision is the same. This is back to the up level. So this is the case of Czech Republic. By comparing the three, we found that they are telling the different stories, but also they are also like telling the different aspects of the same story. For example, in the radical centralist like China and the Fuxing case, there is an intensive top-down intervention. The good side of that, is the city get a lot of resources, plenty of resources, and the political wind power is very strong. And those are the shrinking city are very desperately needed. The money and the projects, and this is the good side of that. But without the local leadership, so the local actors, those policies, monies are very short-term. It has a very short-term effect. It's like to apply electronic shot to a dying person, and it will come back like one time, and then the economic fall back again. And we call that as a problem of contextualization. In the case of New Bedford, and the local approach was approachable for recognizing the multiple voice and then orienting the local policy from getting growth to more focus on improving the quality of life of local person. I think this is the good side of that. So the smart shrinkage or the right sizing policy has did a lot of things to like finding the owner of abandoned buildings and change the use of the abandoned landlords, changes to car parks or something. So that's the policies to adapt to the shrinkage. So that's the good side of that. But the problem for this policy is that although the right sizing strategy allowed New Bedford to effectively weather the change without requiring too much economic growth or population growth, but the local policy did not have much direct success in resisting this shift. The overall trends are still there. They are still losing population, but maybe the life is better there. So this is a problem we call that the problems of decontextualization. In the case of Czech Republic and Ústí nad Labem, and transforming is the idea behind that the case study. So for them, the accepting the shrinkage is not a problem, but the cities still adopt a pro-growth mentality to find economic growth. So that's, I think, is the only option of the case is that the multi-level governance body did not formulate and promote and implement the relevant policy actions that is relevant to the city's need. So that is a problem we call recontextualization. So they accept the shrinkage, but they cannot come back to the city and to do what is needed. So if we compare this together, we argue that for the shrinking cities that they need multi-level coordination to contextualize the phenomena of losing population, to decontextualize the role of the multi-level politics, politics and recontextualize the national, regional, and the local body of policy that action. And only by doing so, we think that the shrinking cities can manage their development better than just let it develop even worse. So that's my presentation, and this is the work of 3 of our co-authors. Those who want the details of the research can go to this paper. Well, thank you.
Thank you a lot, Kai. It's an amazing presentation. Okay, so we have the last contribution today. It's Sophia. She's part of our group. Yeah, Sophia, now is your turn.
Thank you. My internet is very terrible, so this is the caveat, and I'm going to turn my turn off my camera when I'm presenting, but obviously I am here. Oh, can you see my screen?
I can.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How do I start the presentation? So like this. Oh my God, no. Do I just press the slideshow at the stop? Okay. Yeah, is that working?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
super. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really great to learn from actual practitioners and people who've been working on this for quite some time. And I'm happy to be at the end because what I'm going to do really is set the arguments that Mario made in the context of urban planning and hopefully offer some points of relevance as a complementary framing for the papers that we've heard today, and also a sort of critical reflection and some ways forward. So post-growth perspectives on planning really depart from a paradox, which is both ecological and social. And that is the idea that planning is generally perceived to be a tool to generate profit or economic growth, but at the same time, economic growth generates problems for planning. So as John Barry, amongst others, had laid out very clearly in his papers, the relationship between economic growth, resource consumption, land use, and population growth means that planning is in a neoliberal crisis. And whilst planning focuses on many things, including well-being, success for human flourishing, its outcomes are usually expressed in monetary terms. So in sum, the goal of economic growth is privileged and has as its consequences CO2 emissions, biodiversity loss, housing supply, heat islands, for example. In other words, problems for planning to solve. And in these ways, planning actually increases its own workload, whilst contributing all the while to high rental costs, population migration, diminishing biodiversity, the factors that we've heard that affect shrinking cities today. And this loop also produces the problem of unequal spatial development or shrinkage, because as the work of Yvonne Ryden has shown us for quite some time now, planning itself occurs only in the context where growth can be forecast in many cases. And planning, as she argues, is growth dependent. It occurs with difficulty in low growth areas. So in sum, because urban planning needs growth to function and bring about development, this casts doubt on its capacity to function in low growth areas. And these are the two arguments that really lie at the heart of post-growth critiques, which call, therefore, for us to rethink how planning works on a very profound level. This perpetual looping can only go so far because of the ecological dimension of this problem. We live in a planet with finite resources and are in a situation where building up and up in hope of creating a better world is undermining our very foundations. And this is just an illustration to show that concept. In other words, it's not really a loop, it's just a line, and we are heading towards ecological collapse despite our best intentions. And that sort of brings us to the question that we've been posing at the symposium today, which is how do cities adapt? How can they adapt to tackle the problems posed by growth when growth is both the solution and the problem? And so this concept of adaptation is at the focus of my talk, because the question of how cities adapt is really historic. It's long been posed, and I'm an ancient historian. My field has long thought about the why of cities transforming, rising and falling. It's sought to understand this phenomenon in terms of cycles and systems, and has asked whether it's even right to think of shrinking, declining and growing, or whether we should think in terms of transition and transformation. And these problems really lie at the heart of our urban debate. They're provocative because of how we assign value to change. And they're important because the perspective that we take on urban change is crucial to the trajectory of urban history. How you think about adaptation determines the solutions you can entertain, whether these are versions of the past you are open to accepting or the solutions for the future you are willing to explore. There's a really lively debate in scholarship about how cities should adapt for post-growth, and so I'm going to run through some of these arguments and bring them into conversation with the papers that we've heard today. In the main, urban adaptation, as I'm sure you're aware, is often framed as a question of regeneration and resilience in association with ideas like sustainability. And planning literature has thought and analysed these concepts as processes of evolution, arguing, for example, through resilience theory, and that's what's shown on the slide, that the city is subject to destructive cycles through which it becomes progressively more resilient. And here the city is thought of as in a process of dynamic transformation through which it is gradually improved and adapts to its context by the concerted actions of planning and policy together. In contrast to this approach, the emerging body of scholarship on post-growth planning has questioned and problematized how these imaginations of resilience and adaptation actually really constrict the true potential of planning and urban life, primarily because this idea of adaptation casts the city pathologically as something to be cured, and it plays, therefore, a legitimizing function for existing orthodoxies, particularly the ongoing dominance of technological solutions as a route towards regeneration and sustainability, engineered by industrial and institutional actors who play the part of evolving the city through market-led development and, for example, smart city approaches, where the focus is on profit and efficiency. So post-growth planning is really asking instead, what does it mean to adapt on a more profound level, to take a different perspective of adaptation and to pose a bigger challenge to this question? Over the past decade, perspectives have emphasized the importance of rethinking what planning even means, particularly in scenarios where growth cannot be forecast. Planning, rather than facilitating a known outcome, can be a process which generates uncertain outcomes, through which it might truly bring about deep change, new methods and new relationships between the human and the environment and social dynamics. And this is what's deemed necessary for post-growth. This kind of thinking is evident in approaches taken, for example, in Finland, where practitioners in low-growth neighbourhoods argued in favour of back-loop approaches. And this is what you see here. I'm not sure, maybe people are already familiar with this, but back-loop means to change the sequence of rational action, which is characterized by visioning, strategizing, performing, and assessing strategic progress towards a known outcome. Backloop thinks instead of rational action as establishing a context in which we are comfortable with uncertainty and make space for creative networks, collaborations that lead to experimentation and new activities, specifically in low growth and shrinking contexts. So in other words, adapting here means disrupting how we think to avoid path dependency, and by bringing about different outcomes which can go beyond growth in those contexts. When I think about this, I think about it in relation to two quotes. The first outlines post-structuralist thinking, which asks us to focus on the process and our guiding principles rather than the definite outcome. And, you know, thinking of going to post-growth without a fixed image of what that should necessarily be. And the second is a poem. This is one of my favorite poems by Alice Fulton, where she says that nothing can happen for us unless we move towards what looks like nothing, and we need to have faith. Faith is a cascade. What does that look like in practice? This is the kind of experimentation and governance initiatives exemplified by post-growth planning and the work of my friend Patrick Leon Gross. So this is the House of Statistics in Berlin, where the state made an abandoned building available rather than demolishing it and allowing investors to redevelop the land. It makes the property available, after which a collective of local government bodies formed, including the district office, 2 state-owned real estate management companies and a cooperative, which worked together to facilitate a regeneration project conceptualized through local discussions, debates and collaboration. And they used really kind of innovative public participation methods like choirs, cocktail evenings, to include these voices that are typically unheard in planning and traditional planning settings where you don't have equal speech. This resulted in a mixed-use complex which now fosters experimental, communal and economic practices. For example, there's a beehive on top of the roof with cryptocurrency, whose value is tied to the well-being and health of the bee stock, and the bee coin is the local currency for the district. Leon is publishing a paper on this in which he talks about his interviews in which the inhabitants of the district describe themselves as actively taking new ground on how to make a city together, including non-human actors where the focus is on the benefits and not the return. And it's really an amazing project which offers an excellent example of how participation, risk and experimentation can promote a transition away from growth-oriented practices and experimentation in shrinking areas. They also have a really great website online if you do want to have a look at those proposals. So the idea that these types of initiatives form part of a planner's toolkit because they are social innovations which can contribute to a more growth-independent society has more recently been expressed in some key publications which provide a clearer practical and theoretical way forwards for what it might mean to plan for post-growth. Geographers have thought about the types of spaces and places that a city needs to provide to facilitate collective empowerment, with a focus on the debate that post-growth planning is a global subject. It needs to think about how approaches to problems in cities have temporal and global consequences and are part of local chains of value and material flows as well as global chains. Here, the conversation is steered away again from focuses on technological fixes and towards a more profound rethinking of what the city and living practices can be, by dissolving this idea, for example, of an urban-rural divide in bottom-up initiatives, which can increase self-sustaining economic networks. And here there's a focus, on the concept of nowtopia and the decolonization of the concept of the city as something that is separate to nature. In initiatives like urban gardening, citizens make decisions over the use of resources and tools, and communities are increasingly self-reliant, so requirement for waged income decreases. And in these scenarios, rather than thinking of shrinkage and as a negative thing, we can think of self-organization and adaptation, the new uses of spaces. In general, the focus still remains on these local initiatives, and literature is now calling for these to be scaled up across the board. Equally, with this ambition for scale, there comes responsibility. And it's key to note, really, that scaling up is not going to produce a model of post-growth. It's not going to be a post-growth city, and there's not going to be one post-growth scenario. This is about finding appropriate solutions rather than imposing a model, particularly in a technological sense. It's really dangerous to think with models because they seek coherency across time, whilst disregarding the simultaneity of different pasts and cultures. And of course, models such as the model of the modern city, which I'm showing quite literally here as a model building kit, are what has given us many of the problems that we face today. Our imagination of what a city is and needs to be. And this was raised in one of the papers, the problem of decontextualization can really needs to be addressed. We can't just be extending things in all different spaces. But there has been, saying that a lot of work done by post-growth planners to frame the technological solutions which can be appropriate for a planned restructuring and can be extended as responsible solutions, given that planning has the potential to build, for example, mobility choices and resource efficiency. But the key here is, again, to develop a counter-narrative to the idea of development and innovation and the problematic idea of one appropriate model that cities should move towards, particularly given the global North and South debates, in which the idea of extending a model perpetuates colonial logics and power imbalances. So this is really a question about the role, again, of models, but also the state. And if you're thinking about different governance mechanisms, regional and local, for post-growth planning, that's really the paper that you need to read, the 2023 paper at the top there. In connection to this, literature has addressed the very language of planning, proposing these action-oriented principles rather than a set of material characteristics or ideas like, regeneration, shrinking, degrowth, sort of in the spirit that language itself can help us to do things differently, break out of patterns and imaginations of planning. So dwelling, for example, you have dwelling, moving, governing, regulating, nurturing, and being. And dwelling relates to how a society can involve a community of dwellers collectivizing property. It is, in the words of Dan Durant, about diversifying housing tenures and using spatial allocations for new housing rather than simply trying to solve problems by generating more market-led house building. And in this case, one possible solution is to allow citizens to manage, own, and organise the estate on which they live by way of intense democratic engagement and solidarity. So again, this literature is sort of pointing to the emergence of new civic assemblies as a way to manage space in low growth or post-growth contexts, as a way to reorganise relationships to space and consumption without necessarily giving a prescriptive way to do so. And finally, increasingly, we are conceptualizing the post-growth planner. Post-growthers ask what a planner can do when they are operating within a system that requires growth, and are thinking, therefore, about the role of the planner as a political actor, a professional who is insurgent. Post-growth takes the stance that a planner cannot be value neutral, and that even though they face internal challenges from the political and economic system, they still have tools at their disposal. And here the work of Christian Lamke and Dan Durant is key again. And that's Christian's podcast that you can see shown there, where he interviews planners and identifies barriers and best practices for post-growth, where post-growth planning means acting in circular ways with available resources through a multiplicity of roles, with the aim to enhance the quality of life for a diversity of people. And in their recent spatial agenda, there have been two spatial agendas published recently, the degrowth and post-growth agendas. And these have outlined some of the ways in which planning can move past market logics and state that planners should highlight much more strongly the consequences of environmental and social terms in their work, looking to the medium long term as well as the more immediate political or policy timescale. And this calls for a supportive policy framework at regional, national scales, and ideally even international scales. So here's a focus on planning institutions as well as supporters of that change, because obviously in the long term, planners will have to address institutional practices. And in the words of the recent degrowth spatial agenda, it's important to create a dialogue with official institutions which can translate agendas into practice at scale, and where the instruments and tools of planning can be debated. So that's really like a whistle-stop tour of post-growth thinking about planning. I think a lot of the papers today, we've been thinking about shrinking and how to manage shrinking and regeneration. And post-growth really does offer an idea for how to govern space and plan space in different ways, which is applicable in those contexts. Shrinking can be thought about as an opportunity for change and introduced to communal discussion of how to live, and really requires a rethinking of how we imagine planning itself, which has perhaps not been the focus of many of the papers today. How we can reimagine planning and the role of the city, and in so doing, use shrinking as an opportunity for qualitative change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you a lot, Sophia. So I think this was a perfect conclusion that combined many of the things that we are doing here in the lab with the amazing empirical evidence that you guys provided today, you know, with different way of collecting data, different reflection about from the financial aspect to the urban planning aspects, to the participation of citizens into the transformation of cities. And I think that's probably the main message that we can contribute as lab, as Sophia was saying, is that the fact that shrinking doesn't necessarily mean something bad if we are going to if we are keen on changing the rules, no, of the debate here, and probably thinking about a qualitative leap forward into something that is completely different from what we have seen in the last 70 years, which is basically planning for economic growth that is becoming more and more disruptive, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a social perspective. Yeah, so I think they are all the ingredients to build several research agenda for the future, and that's why me and Kai, we are thinking of a potential more systematic collaboration between us, and we are also like asking some for little amount of money, right, to do that. I don't know, maybe if you have some comments or you want to follow up the discussion, I think that we are over time, but still I think that we can stretch a little bit limits, if it's okay with you. Yeah.
I'm more.
Yes. Okay, I have only a very short question or a comment, because it is for me a bit difficult to accept the very notion post-growth geography, post-growth time. You know, I am a proponent of the concepts of cyclic or wave-like growth, which means that we have periods of growth and degrowth or decline, where in some areas we can observe growth trends, in some other geographical areas, post-growth or degrowth trends. So how are you relating the post-growth concept to the concept of cyclic growth? Are we doomed to a permanent degrowth, for instance? You know, this is another, for me, important question.
Can I take this one?
Yeah, of
so
course.
Was that for me? Sorry. Thank you for your question. I was also sort of struggling with this when I was thinking about different theories of change. And I think Georgios Kallis talks about it in his work, where he says it's not that degrowth, it's not that you are imagining like a line going up and then degrowth and then a line perpetually going down. Like, it's more that a kind of change in perspective, as well as the fact that obviously there will be periods of growth or places where there is growth, but it's about changing the ideology that is kind of the driver of our society, in the same way that there will be like types of decoupling, but just not on the scale that we want. Geographies of degrowth and post-growth, it's perhaps I didn't come across, but it's not that that means that they're going to shrink. Post-growth is kind of about thinking beyond growth, if that's an easier way to think about it. Like, how can we reorganize and do things differently, rather than how can we literally make things smaller or, you know, degrow in say. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can just very quickly follow up. One of the very nice picture that Sophia showed is a cycle, or there are multiple cycles. This is how nature works, right? The problem is that maybe the cycle of nature, as one of my favorite anthropologists, Arturo Escobar, said, the cycle of nature and cycle of caring, because nature is also about maintaining, about reproducing, about caring, no? This is what we forgot many times in urban planning, that's once we have an infrastructure like a bridge, then we have to maintain it, right? Well, look what's happening in Italy a few years ago with the bridge. So the cycle of nature are usually incompatible with capitalism cycles. No, that's is focused on speeding up this cycle, because basically it's the accumulation cycle, right? Yeah, I totally agree with Tadeusz. So we have to think things more than post-growth and degrowth is about going beyond growth. Now, thinking about in cycle, and definitely there will be things that we need to grow. In Europe, we need to grow the access to public education, to public health. In many places in Africa, in Asia, and South America, we need certain levels of growth. And in other sectors, we need definitely degrowth. But in this constant dynamic equilibrium, it's not just, you know, it's very like debunking this economicism that decolonize our imagination. That's this of the indicators that go up and then at certain point go down, which is also like the power images of the limits to grow, the famous report, no, that show these indicators going up and going down. Is the same logic. I think that we need to break that logic. I don't want to monopolize the discussion. There are any other questions or?
Victor has his hand, I think.
Do you want to follow up, Tadeusz? Because you have your hand raised.
No, oh yeah, it's sorry, it's now it's okay. It's
okay.
It lasts some time.
Yeah, I don't know, Kai. Do you want to do some concluding remarks?
I think I leave the concluding remarks to Wutong, Professor Wu. Regarding to the things we discussed, we have 5 minutes for the meeting. Okay. Then maybe next.
I am unable to see myself on my screen, so I assume you can see me. Thank you very much for Kai and others to organize this. I think it's a wonderful occasion to, one, listen to the new ideas about post-growth and what does it mean for planning, and learn about the various situation about managing shrinking cities in different parts of the world. Okay, I'm going to because of the time, I'm going to just raise 2 points. About one, I like to ask ourselves, stimulate my fellow researchers to think about how do we make our research on shrinking cities relevant to communities now facing potential economic downturn, from specific policies in relation to the new climate policies like zero emission, right? They will definitely impact on some communities more than others. Some of them are not likely to be able to cope. Some are more likely to be able to cope better than others. Just to say that, it is obvious policymakers haven't caught on the possible and potential and real impacts of those policies on communities. Quick example, an Australian community not far from where I live had its coal power generator electric generation station turned off a few weeks ago. This has been planned for over 3 years. This is part of the government's push towards zero emission in this economy. But nobody prepared the community for this eventuality. The community say, hey, why are we given to bear the cost? Why you guys can go around the world saying we are achieving zero emission? So I ask ourselves, how do we make our research on shrinking cities and how we manage it relevant to those communities who are looking for just transition, right? First point. Second point, I think it's very interesting to hear about various ideas about post-growth, and much perhaps better to say rethinking how to deal with growth, decline, regeneration, or adaptation. I think that's wonderful, and I learned a lot today. Okay, thank you very much. But I want to ask this question. This is a very interesting new set of ideas. How do we persuade communities and politicians, the policymakers, to start thinking about this issue and adopting some of the ideas? In other words, what are the obstacles that we face in getting politicians and community to adopt this new thinking? Okay. Now, let me, you are all familiar with the literature, Karina Polygas and others, about different phases of accepting urban shrinkage and the policymakers making policies to deal with those issues. But let me give you, give you two examples in the world where